We have two excellent speakers here from the Kurdish community, Hawzhin and Baran, who are going to tell you a lot about the Rojava revolution and also the danger it is in now and what we need to do. What I'm going to do in a brief introduction to this with a few slides, and hopefully the people online can see, is to situate it in the current moment, which is one which is actually very, very worrying and scary. The other night, the Greens organized a briefing with Ahmed, who has been the main, I think, international spokesperson for Rojava over the last period, and she gave us very interesting information. The word that struck me that she used to describe the current situation is fragile. Fragile. And, you know, that means that from moment to moment, it's uncertain exactly which way it goes. There is a potential in the current ceasefire agreement, if it is truly abided by various forces, including the bad guys, as Coral put it, in the Syrian Transitional Government, but not just them. All the other international actors that are constantly meddling in the situation, they can wreck it at any minute now. And therefore, fragile, I think, captures it quite well. Let me see if I can get to that. Next slide. Now, this map you can see here, the yellow spots in the map, that's basically where the forces of the Rojava revolution have had to retreat. And the light green spot is all the area they've had to retreat from. 80%. 80%. That's all happened in less than a month, since January the 6th. I mean, it is an incredible process. In the midst of this, there have been atrocities committed, as I'm sure you will hear. The full story of these atrocities, we still don't know. Because how do we find out? Who finds out? Who has access, and true access? I don't know, how many thousand, 160 to 170,000, maybe more people have fled in the last few weeks, their homes. Most rushing up to those little orange areas because, you know, they're hoping to be defended. That is the urgency of the situation. Now, what flipped the switch? And if you need a simple refresher of the main course of events over January, there's an excellent article in Green Left by Sarah Glynn, who writes regularly for us, called The Timetable of Treachery, I think it's called. And it is a chronology. And what really flipped the switch was a January 6th meeting in Paris. And like so many moments in recent Kurdish history, international actors make a decision that has a huge and often deadly impact on the Kurdish people, and not just the Kurdish people, a lot of other people, particularly the minority groups in Syria, far away in a European country. And at the meeting, the agreement basically was made with no Kurdish participation for the main European and US powers, with the support of Israel, to allow the bad guys, Jolani, as the SDG, to go on a military offensive against the Kurds. Basically, that's what happened. That flipped the switch. And a whole series of attacks started to happen. There was already mounting attacks on Kurdish neighborhoods in Aleppo. But it expanded, and it was gathering force, greater and greater force. And the moment it became clear that the so-called coalition forces, who have control of the airspace over Syria, they've got the power, the air power, that they were not going to back any resistance to Damascus, to the SDG. Well, that, of course, created a snowball impact. Defections started to take place. Allies of the former, of the SDF, some of the allies, not all, some of the Arab allies, immediately turned against, so went on the attack against the Kurds. So as the authorities in Rojava explained, they had a very simple choice. They could pull out the weapons and just fight to the death, but there would have been a tremendous bloodshed. And instead, they chose to retreat and try to make the retreat as orderly as possible and negotiate along the way to try and find a different way forward, right? And that's basically what's happened. And on August 29, an agreement was made. Now the agreement is to integrate, but possibly to allow some degree of autonomy in the form of some control, both military forces and administrative control in the key Kurdish majority areas of Rojava, what's left of it. Theoretically, the agreement also says that the Kurds who have been displaced can go back. So if I move on to the next slide. See, this is where it all started at the beginning of the revolution. This is a map which shows you the 3 cantons in the north of Syria that were liberated by the Kurdish forces in 2012 during the Syrian civil war. Now, the most westernmost section, Afrin, was taken over by effectively by Turkey and Turkish-backed militia forces back in 2018, right? And so that's been lost. Now, under the current agreement, theoretically, everybody is allowed to go back to their homes, but nothing has been done to ensure that. What safety would the people who have fled have if they return to Afrin, which is still under the control of the same forces? So there's much in the agreement that's uncertain, and I don't know whether the speakers might want to mention some of it. The Kurds are quite clear in what they are, at least the Rojava authorities are quite clear in what they want. They want a significant degree of autonomy, 1. 2, they want the rights of Kurds and other minorities to be entrenched into the constitution. 3, this agreement needs to be under the spotlight. It cannot happen in the dark. So they want some international monitoring through UN, etc., so that they can't just get away with signing a piece of paper and doing the opposite. Okay, that brings you up to what the desperation situation. But before I hand it over to Hawzhin, I want to just put my position about why I think this is so important. I believe what happened in the Rojava Revolution was very significant for the whole of humanity and for history. It is one of 2, I believe, of only 2 revolutionary experiments that kicked off in the 21st century. The other one was under Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. And the reason why I say these are revolution, it's not just because there is a struggle and there's a change of government, but there is an attempt to change the actual power relationships in society. And I think in the case of Rojava, has been said before, this is most powerfully summed up in a huge transformation of the role of women in society. Women are empowered. A woman carrying a gun, the arming of women itself is an incredible thing in the context of a society that has been totally dominated by patriarchy. You don't muck around with the subjugated people who have weapons in their hands. So empowering the oppressed, I think that's the guts of a true revolution. If you just change the leaders on top, you keep the same state structure, the power structures haven't changed, that's not a revolution. You just change the leaders on top. And I think this is what is, to me, was the precious thing. So precious. Now, Hawzhin's going to tell you a lot more about the revolution and its values. I'm not going there. She's much better qualified. I'm not going to say, I'm just telling you my impressions, These are the things, the world cannot ignore. It is so dramatic. Many, many countries in the world would have loved to have a chance to taste a bit of this sort of transformation. Sometimes I think people saw the pictures of the YPJ, the women fighters, freedom fighters, and they've, you know, especially in the last month, the amount of propaganda that comes out to try and discredit the Kurds. Money is flowing from the UAE, from Saudi Arabia, wherever it's Turkey, you know, and there are all these people, including Western media outlets, that are coming up with the most atrocious slanders against the Rojava revolution. They say, oh, all this stuff about women's bullshit. They just take pictures of pretty young women carrying a gun. It's some kind of like revolutionary, you know, propaganda. Well, that's why I think that's true. They're young people, of course, in a revolution. But there are also these people. You know, mothers, grandmothers, who are taking responsibility for the running of society. I think, to me, that's the image I want to leave you with. And I'll leave to our other speakers to tell you more about this revolution. But that's why it's important. We are not just talking about a human rights issue here, not just another war, another question of justice. We're talking about defending something very precious, not just for the Kurds, not just for Rojava, but for the whole world.
I'm going to try, even though I think it is almost near impossible to raise, to discuss what the Rojava revolution is about. I lived in Rojava, in Kobane, from 2015 to about 2019. I had the privilege of intimately witnessing this revolution, both on a military level, but also on a civilian level. But I want to focus more on the civilian aspect, because as Peter so beautifully mentioned, the Yepaja, these beautiful young women who are fighting with these beautiful, colorful skirts on the front lines, are very much often sexualized, romanticized, and so their images are often used in a way to orientalize what these women are trying to do. What they're trying to do is so much larger and bigger than what the mainstream international media has presented to us. So very briefly, for those who don't know, I know this side of the room, being our Kurdish community, is very informed about this, but this is more for this side of the room and for those who are joining us online, to just have a visual of what Rojava looks like. Maybe Peter can go to the next slide. That would be really lovely. So we're talking about Rojava, and this is the section of Kurdistan which is actually the smallest, but arguably the most important in relation to this discussion around Kurdish autonomy, but also not just Kurdish autonomy and identity, but collectively, regionally within the Middle East in relation to minority rights. And remember, this discussion around Rojava, around the Kurds, entails a very strong discussion about minority rights, democracy, federalism, identity rights, but specifically women's rights. Okay. We have seen throughout history, women have participated in revolutions from Algeria to Lebanon to Iran with the 1979 revolution. We have seen women participate, lead revolutions, be on the front lines, be killed, experience gender-based violences. And as soon as the revolution is over, these women are actually pushed back into the kitchens, often having lost some of the rights that they had previous to the revolution. So this discussion around Rojava very much entails learning from history. We as Kurdish people, specifically we as Kurdish women, have to learn from the mistakes of the past so that this new system in Rojava takes those lessons, learns from it, and refuses to repeat it. And this is why, can we go to the next slide, Peter? It's very, very important that we discuss this role of women, because they are integral, they are foundational in this discussion around liberation for minorities. So very briefly, the Rojava revolution emerged following the Arab Spring around late 2011, 2012. There were mass uprisings across the regions. There was a lot of discussion around democratization and what that would look like. And so within this vacuum that was created in Syria, which had lived under the brutality of the Assad regime for decades, the Kurds came in and implemented the Rojava revolution, which follows this concept of democratic confederalism. Okay? So what is democratic confederalism? What does it look like? How is it different to the kind of democracies that we have here in the West? And what can we learn sitting here in Australia, joining in Canada, America, and Europe? What can we learn from Rojava that could help us actually become more democratic, more inclusive, have more institutions that are horizontal as opposed to hierarchical, and have more freedom and liberty for minorities, and obviously women. Now, this entire discussion that I'm about to present is prefaced with a background of war by jihadists such as ISIS and multiple different other factions, which I won't name because it will get very confusing, but many, many different jihadist groups. They all have essentially the same aim. They are extremists, they are very violent. The only difference between them is which group, which man gets to be in charge. That is the only difference. These terrorist groups are funded, supported, they're provided with all kinds of supplies, logistic, military, medical, and otherwise, by Turkey, by Qatar, by Saudi Arabia, and some of these other countries who are very much invested in having a specific type of state system and identity, Islamic identity in the region. So just going to the next slide. So the pillars of the Rojava Revolution are three key concepts. It is about radical democracy, it is about women's liberation, and it is about the environment. These three pillars underpin the kinds of civil society work, the kind of communal, council, canton level work, organizations and institutions that have been established, and everything that is done, every decision that is made, every organization that is developed goes back to these three pillars. Now, part of my work in Rojava when I was there was in the reconstruction of Kobane, which was liberated from ISIS in 2014. And so immediately on the liberation of Kobane, we established the Kobane Reconstruction Board because we wanted people to remain in Kobane as opposed to being displaced. So I was part of the civilian side of things. We were rebuilding the roads and the hospitals and the schools, and we wanted to reconstruct this city, this historic city, which had so incredibly, against all odds, defeated ISIS. And so part of the discussions that we were having about building roads, hospitals, schools, neighborhoods was, how do we make it democratic? How do we make it inclusive? How do we create democracy in these physical spaces where we have more women and children who are traditionally in these societies pushed back into the kitchen in the dark atmosphere, and literally in the dark because usually there's no electricity. How do we bring them out into the community? So let's have green spaces in the center of the community so they are visible, open, and publicly able to participate in civil life. Now, the practical implementation of the revolution entailed one very, very important step. And please, if there's one thing you take away from this entire discussion, it's this. The implementation was practical. It wasn't just verbal, it wasn't just military, it wasn't just rhetoric and discussion and dialogue, it was practical. And this practical process was implemented through the academies, what we call the Parwarda institutions. So we had many, many different institutions, Parwarda or schools, so to speak, who educated the communities, society, women, the elderly grandmothers that Peter showed us, children from all levels of society, from teachers to engineers to lawyers. Every sector of society was to learn about these three pillars of democratic confederalism and utilize this ideology to implement the way that they worked as a law council, as the union of engineers, as a school, educational institutions, and so on. So what that entailed is in these educational seminars and schools, which would sometimes go on for a day, sometimes they were 3 days, sometimes they would be entire months long. I've participated in them. We had mothers who came with their children. They were provided with babysitting. We stayed in the academy, food, everything was provided, and all we had to do was go to school and learn about history, capitalism, gender liberation, the history of the state, the meaning of democracy. How do you teach people to be democratic, not only physically by moving democratically with each other in society, but mentally democratic? How do we teach men who have lived in very patriarchal societies to suddenly allow women to be publicly visible, to participate in public spaces, to be the yapaja, to hold weapons, to lead the war? in relation to their to the community's liberation. So that requires a lot of education, a lot of dialogue, a lot of communication, a lot of learning and unlearning within society. Now, this is something that is really, really missing in our societies. You know, as socialist alliance, as feminist, as feminist, whatever group of left that we find ourselves in, we really lack these educational institutions that educate society about different ways of existing and how we can implement it with one another. So these two photos are photos that I actually took while I was in Kobane. This is the women's padwarda, so women were coming together and they were having discussions about how do we address democracy within our society? How do we deal with gender-based violence in our society? How do we deal with the concept of family? How do we democratize our families? What does it look like to have a democratic marriage between two members of our communities? And these women, many of whom are usually illiterate, because we know that the Assad regime was very much implemented a povertization, a system and systematic policy of underdevelopment in the Kurdish region in the north. If you remember Peter's map, in the north, that's where most of the Kurds are. And so these women didn't have access to education. A lot of them are illiterate. And yet I sat in these meetings with them and they were having critical discussions and dialogue about anti-capitalism, ecofeminism, revolution, revolutionary struggles. What does it look like for us to defend ourselves? What does this defense look like for women participating and men participating? Now, I'm an academic. I have a PhD. I have taught in universities, and some of the discussions that was coming out of these meetings blew my mind. It was radical, it was critical, it was revolutionary, it was a reflection and outcome of the padwarda, the education that was being conducted across society. No one was left out of this revolution. This wasn't a masculinist revolution by men. This wasn't a hierarchical one where only the young people, the beautiful people participated. Every section of society was encouraged to participate. Every section of society had a role and could contribute to this revolution. There's no such thing as useless people within this system. In the capitalist system, certain people, certain communities, certain people that age out are deemed irrelevant, no longer necessary, no longer vital to the system. Rojava subverts that. In fact, the elderly women and men, but specifically the women, had so much wisdom. They are natural healers, they are educators, they are leaders, they are civil society organizers, they are demonstrators. There's so much skill that can be utilized from these women, from sections of society, that can really contribute to the democratization of society, to contribute to a society that is equal on multiple levels, so everybody feels seen, heard, participated in, and can contribute. Okay. So the ideology of this women's liberation comes from this Kurdish concept of genealogy. Now, as Kurdish women, there's a lot of criticism about feminism, because we have been the subject of white feminism or neoliberal feminism, and so we really contest this concept. We call it genealogy. And genealogy, you don't have to read it, it's okay. I can share these slides with people who are interested in seeing some of these slides. I can email it to you later on. But this concept of genealogy, women's science, comes from the writings of Abdullah Öcalan that Koral introduced to us. And he speaks so powerfully about killing the masculine man. Now, we're not talking about killing men in society, Peter. Don't worry, you're all safe. Everybody's safe. Well, we're already doing that in Rojava, so to speak, because we are killing the ideal prototype of this masculinist, toxic, extremist, patriarchal masculinity, which is ISIS, which believes in all forms of violence, which believes in silencing women, which doesn't believe in diversity or democracy. It believes in one flag, one idea, one nation, one language, one people, one religion, and everybody else is open to be massacred, like chicken to the slaughter, basically. So Öcalan writes beautifully about the need to liberate women. He says, without liberating women, there is no democracy, there is no democratic society. Women are the first colonized people. Okay? This is very important. Revolution needs to be from the bottom upward. It can never be upward, downward. Most of the revolution that we have seen is men, which are still above women, implementing their ideas around what democracy and liberation looks like. Hawzhin says, no, 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 no. It has to be the woman that lead. You must feel comfortable in allowing women to lead. Now, let's go back to the parwarda. I participated in a lot of these parwardas educational systems where men were sitting in some of these parwarda settings, and they were saying, well, I don't feel comfortable with women leading. My wife is illiterate. Why should I allow her to lead my family? Okay. The capitalist system, the patriarchal system, has taught us to compartmentalize certain types of knowledges, certain types of experiences. If you have a degree, you're a person of value. If you are illiterate, you have no value. If you are an older person, your value decreases within society. It's the younger people who should be leading. This ideology says it's the other way around. Everybody can contribute. So he says, for a democratic nation, this is halfway after the 4 dots, for a democratic nation, women's freedom is of great importance to us. As liberated women constitute liberated society. Liberated society in turn constitutes democratic nation. Moreover, the need to reverse the role of men is of revolutionary importance. Now, we've received a lot of criticism as Kurdish women by other feminists saying, well, a man wrote your feminist ideology, so how feminist could a man be? Okay. Abdullah Öcalan gave us the foundation of it, but it is the Kurdish women who have fought, who have picked up the weapons, who have led the revolutions, who have been in the mountains, on the streets, doing the work, and they have implemented this ideology, but they have added to it. So I'm going to move through some of the slides very fast. I won't go into it because there's a lot of things to get through. But through this process, we've developed the women's protection units, okay, and the people's protection units. As I said, this entire discussion is prefaced by Assad attacking us, by Turkey taking huge swaths of land, Turkish-backed jihadists who have been funneled through the jihadi highway. This is actually a scientific term, jihadi highway, that was created through Turkey into Syria, where massive amounts of jihadists from all over the world were given a red carpet treatment by Turkey to enter into Syria and slaughter people. Okay? Now, these slaughters, it's very important for us to say that it's not just the Kurds, it's the Yazidis, it's Armenians, it's Christian communities, it's Assyriac, it's Druze, it's Alawites. Any minority that does not follow a specific identity of Arab and Sunni ideology, and a very radical Arab and Sunni ideology, is in serious danger right now. So the Rojava revolution is often subverted, and the discussions are usually about the YPG, who are integral to this discussion, because without self-defense, in these war-torn communities, rife with jihadist groups and entities, self-defense is non-negotiable. How can you implement a revolution if you are dying and being ethnically cleansed out? Please let me know if I've been talking too long. So yes, the women's protection, the people's protection units are very important, but the civil pillars of the Rojava revolution is also integral. Now I'm going to go to the next slide. One of the most successful, brilliant works that we did as the Kobane Reconstruction Board, but later on as part of my personal work in Rojava, is we were integral in building Jinwar, which was a woman's only village established in Rojava. And this is so important as a woman, and I cannot emphasize it enough. It is so important if we're going to have a women's revolution that we have women's only spaces. Okay? Yes, women's only spaces are established with the YPG. Okay? We will take on the responsibility of protecting ourselves as women, and we will take on the responsibility of protecting other women. We cannot trust the men. We cannot trust the men to protect us, because we've seen that the men will always turn around and oppress us. So in this entirety of the discussion, the YPG, the women's movement, retains complete autonomy. Now, this is the interesting part. The women can make decisions that can be implemented, and the men have to take it. But if the men make a decision, and they cannot force it on the woman whether in the YPG or the civil institutions, can reject it. That's the level of autonomy that they have. And it must be this way in order for this revolution to succeed. There can be no compromise on our bodies, on our life, on our integrity, on our honor as women. We will not take any chances. Now, at the moment, with what's happening with the Syrian Transitional Government, which now sounds like a sexually transmitted disease as a result of some of the discussions we've been having in my head, these women's gains are in serious, serious danger. So the attack isn't just, we want to silence the Kurds. The Kurds are infidels, they're not really Muslims. We want to erase them. If they toe the line, look at that. What they're attacking is the Kurdish women and some of the other women within this, Armenian women, Arab women, and other women who have participated in building this revolution. They're attacking the women's rights institutions and organizations. Now, this gender equality has to be implemented and institutionalized in order for it to work. So what Rojava has done to make sure that it actually works is they have implemented a co-chair system. So Peter, do you guys have a co-chair system as the Socialist Alliance?
No. Yeah, we don't tell you that.
Fail, not democratic enough. Okay. So at every level, whether it's the Ministry of, I don't know, Foreign Affairs, or of Women, or the Law Society, every institution, whether government or civil, has to have one male and one female. There has to be a 40% gender quota. So certain industries, such as, let's say, engineering, are traditionally male-dominated, especially in the Middle East. Okay. We have to have at least 40%. Make spaces for women. If we have to give scholarships to women to go and get educated so that we have more female engineers and lawyers and so on, do that. Let's fund these processes. And we have women's only spaces, which I mentioned is Jinwar, but also women's houses. I have a very interesting story about the women's house personally in Kobane, which maybe I'll share later. But these are visible spaces used for women. Okay, where women say, we are going to use these spaces to address our issues, the problems that we face as women, gender-based violence, sexual violence. I should have actually added on there, but polygamy, child marriages, underage marriages, all of that is our goals. International human rights law reigns in the constitution of Rojava, and it is implemented, and people who break it are punished. Okay? We have the women's self-protection units, but we also have women's protection units within the Asayish, which kind of control the neighborhoods. So anyway, this women's revolution is not just in rhetoric. It's real, it's institutionalized, it is implemented across multiple different levels. So this current struggle, and this is why we need you guys to pay attention to what's happening in Rojava and in Syria, is a gendered issue. Women internationally need to be paying attention. It is a discussion around democracy and human rights. It's a discussion around minority rights, but it is a fight, it is an existentialist fight around two specific ideologies. One is extremist, violent, patriarchal, capitalist. The other is democratic, horizontal, feminist, ecological. Thank you. I'm sorry I spoke too long.
I'd also like to acknowledge the lands we are meeting on today, and these lands always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I wish the oppressors also acknowledge the lands that they're on and acknowledge Kurdish lands where they have ruined our homes and destroyed our villages and forced millions and millions of our people to flee their lands and go to take refuge in other parts of the world. Also want to thank the Socialist Alliance, especially Peter and all the other members and Coral as well, for bringing the event together. And also want to acknowledge our Kurdish representations here as well. We have both the co-chair of the Kurdish Community Centres here with us. We have Kurdish representative from Europe as well. And we have our wonderful Inner West councillor and a former Kurdish representative, Ahmed. And also a special thank you to my beautiful mother and my sister for always showing support and solidarity.
Absolutely.
I think it's hard having a political child where you always have to go to panels and stuff like that, all the boring stuff. I'll just go back to what Hawzhin said. She spoke about the theory and also her experience in there, and Peter gave a wonderful description about what's happening in Rojava and kind of the geography. I would like to share the experience that myself and Ahmed had in Rojava. So last year in September, a delegation was formed with the leading of Senator David Shoebridge, Green New South Wales Senator, with his advisor Sam, and then we had an academic from Europe, Ellis, and we had Ahmed representing the Inner West Council and myself representing Kurdish community. So we were the first delegation of Australia to go to Rojava, Rojava had also had other delegations from all around the world as well, but it was a big special for us because as Kurdish representatives and sending a first delegation to Rojava on behalf of Australia was very meaningful. So when we went to Rojava, obviously we were expecting to see, I mean there is still, yes, destruction and war going on, but what we saw was totally different. Yes, Hawzhin mentioned the theories of it, but as you see the practice of it, it actually shows that much more is happening and so much more opportunity can happen. When we went to the city of Kamishlo, which is the north part of Rojava, the northeast part of Rojava, we met with foreign spokespersons, and as Hawzhin mentioned as well, it was co-chair, so it wasn't just a man sitting on a chair and everyone surrounds and listens to the man yapping. It was actually wasn't like that. You had women representations there both, and also what struck us was that before the men spoke, there was discussed within themselves who should speak first, and the woman would say, yes, you can speak. So the men would take permission from the woman to speak, and that was an honor for us to be able to experience that. Because as you probably know, in words, anyone could say anything in words, but it's the practice that's important. So after the city of Kamishlo, we went to other cities as well. For example, if you go more towards south part of the Rojava administration, you go to the city of Raqqa. And for those who don't know, Raqqa was a former ISIS capital city. And I'm proud to say the word former because the Kurdish women, the YPJ, liberated that city and took over that city and kind of brought light to it. Raqqa was a city where ISIS had sold innocent women as slaves over there and kind of destroyed their lives by cutting their heads or selling them as sex slaves, not towards just Kurds, but Yazidis, Alawites, Christian women over there as well. There is a very famous roundabout over there, which we stood over there. There used to be sticks of, I'm sorry to say this, but heads of people over there, which ISIS had murdered. But when we went there, we saw flowers. What the Kurdish women told us over there when they liberated, the first thing they did was just take all those sticks out, take all those dark ISIS flags away, and replace them with flowers. Because Kurdish people say this, we are like a flower of gardens. We are all different flowers, and when we all come together, we create this beauty. So when we were over there, we had the honor to experience that. We saw the city of Raqqa rebuilt and become more life. For example, we saw, because when under the siege of ISIS, people were not allowed to go to university. It was considered haram and forbidden. Women were not allowed to be part of the workforce, let alone work. They weren't even allowed to have any representation in government roles. And we were over there, we saw the rebuilding of new universities under the Rojava Kurdish administration, where there was female lecturers, where females were able to be part of the workforce. And we saw that women will also be part of the government authority. For example, being part of the co-chair system over there. And when we were over there, when we were about to go to the circle, they were escorting us with protection, and we had the female woman protecting us. And it was very symbolic that once there used to be an ISIS members over there, now it's the Kurdish woman over there. And then after the city of Raqqa, we went to the city of Kobane. And Kobane itself, it's a whole different story. I think it's like a whole new book that should just be written on its own. Because in 2014, when ISIS-backed groups, especially funded by Turkey and Erdogan regime, they kind of surrounded the city of Kobane and even went inside Kobane. Nearly 70% of Kobane was under siege, where they made mass destruction, killing, torturing, slavering innocent civilians. And when we were over there, me and Ahmed, we thought we were going to go to a city of under rubble. But we went there, we didn't have it. We're going to share a video as well, you'll see it over there. Instead, we saw restaurants, we saw schools, people outside, people even dancing, singing. And we were shocked, and we asked them, because from 2014, the war went to nearly 2018-19. And from there, it's only been like 4 or 5 years. But seeing the growth of this city kind of shocked us, because in Australia, it takes 5 years trying to fix the rubble on the road. And over there, they've kind of created this brand new city. And when we went there, we had the honor of staying inside one of the Kurdish churches over there. And because the locals kind of opened that church for visitors and people to go in and practice their faith, as well as able to stay allowing anyone in the street who doesn't have a place to stay could stay at that church. And when we went there, we were speaking to the locals over there. They were saying that when ISIS came in, they had nowhere to go because behind them is the Turkish border, which prevents people from coming in. And in front of them, it's literally a terrorist radical ISIS people who will kill you on the spot. They have no remorse, no mercy. And when we were over there, they were speaking to us and they were saying that if it wasn't for the Kurdish fighters, especially the Kurdish women, they said we would not be alive. And they thanked the Kurdish people and sharing the experience that now they feel free. Even before ISIS, during the post-Assad regime, Assad didn't even allow them to have a citizenship, see them as human, let alone practice their faith. So when we were over there, we saw the Kobane grow. We saw Kobane. When you'll see one of the videos, there was 2 streets that was preserved. They kept it as a museum. And the reason why they did that, to allow that sense of energy and that feeling you have in that when you're in that rubble area. Because as ISIS came into the city of Kobane, there was only 2 streets or 3 streets left behind you was Turkey. And when we were walking over there, we saw all the rubble, all the buildings destroyed, and each building had its own story. So the person who fought over there, he was telling us how he has bullet wounds all around him, and he was saying that in just this building, there used to be 80 fighters, Kurdish fighters, protecting that building, but only 3 survived. The others were, unfortunately, became martyrs. They were showing us all the cars that had blown up by ISIS. They were showing that how ISIS was trying to push the Kurdish forces towards the Turkish side because the Turkish soldiers were firing back from behind. So imagine if they're fighting the ISIS terrorists and behind you, the Turkish soldiers are shooting at you. So you're stuck over there. But they were saying slowly we took over Kobane. It took around, I think, 9 months, and they paid, unfortunately, a heavy price of 12,000 people. 12,000 young people have lost their lives and thousands more injured. And we had the chance to go visit those cemeteries as well. And when you're over there, it's just so big. Like we couldn't even finish the cemetery, unfortunately, because you can feel the energy. And you're reading the names. It's all like 20, 24, 19-year-old young people. Like those people should be having education, enjoying their lives. Some of them even have children, or some of them maybe want to have a children or want to become a mother. But unfortunately, they had to pay the heavy price of losing their lives. And as Kurds and as people around the world, we have so much respect and kind of debt to them. And wherever we are, we will always pay our respects to those fighters who have lost their lives. And not just fighters as well, but civilians as well. Because unfortunately, as the fall of Assad, we saw al-Sharaa trying to get back into Kobane because they wanted to take over Kobane because Kobane was the heart of Rojava. When they were trying to take over Kobane, there was a dam called the Tishrin Dam, where for nearly a month or so, the civilians kind of created a camp in that dam to prevent the al-Sharaa-backed ISIS groups coming in. And when they were in that dam, they were singing songs, created their camps and stuff like that. There were drone attacks, and they had no remorse. And we know how they don't have any mercy or remorse is because those drones were made by Turkey. Because as the drones fell down with the parts and stuff, you can see in Turkish, and you saw where the drones were being made. And even some of the drone parts came from Australia as well, as you know, in the north part where those drone GPSs are made, unfortunately, here as well. We saw the drone, they would drop the box in front of the mothers and the children. We saw one grave, it was a mother and a father who had lost their life from that drone attack, and a child had become orphaned, unfortunately. So we had the chance to see Kobane. We visited the new city, the new University of Kobane, and they were saying that how much projects they have, they want to do. They want to create sister schools, other universities around the world. They want to create the largest forest project in Syria and around the world, where it will be a forest, but you can also have a school in there, playground, and people to live. Because they were saying that when you're connected to nature, mentally and socially, it has a health benefit for you. They were saying that I want to create more solar panels over there. And we were speaking to one of the Rojava groups over there. They're called the Green Group. Some of the projects were kind of increasing the population of bee. because unfortunately people don't know that unfortunately like pollution can have a big impact on the agriculture as well as our animals as well. And they were saying the crucial bit is when they connect the pollen to pollen, it helps the agriculture. And they also wanted to take care of the street animals because there are a lot of cats and dogs. So they wanted to create this big animal shelter. And through these, when they're doing these projects, it's not funded, it's all volunteer work. It's a volunteer work through the Kurdish restaurants over there, so if there's any food left over, they'll donate it to these shelters. It is the Kurdish mothers who'll be knitting all day for clothes for those animals or for those children who become orphans. It was those people who had, let's say they had an academic bachelor degree, but they couldn't practice it under the Assad government. So now they have this opportunity in the Rojava administration to practice and give back those skills. And one of our translators was this young girl. She had an academic bachelor in English, but she said she couldn't practice it because she was Kurdish, for being Kurdish and for being a woman. But under the Rojava administration, she was allowed to practice her skill. And now she's the main person who looks after all the delegations that come from all around the world. And you saw the media outlets, it's all young women, it's all young men. And you go to from all sectors, like even dance. You wouldn't think that you would see that in Syria because, as you know, you always see like engineers and doctors, but there are dance teachers over there. And I believe it's called Hunarga Welat, the music group, which we'll also be happy to share. They bring all the youth together, showing, expressing their different performances, sharing their pain and suffering through music and poetry. And I'm not saying this is just because I'm Kurdish, but around the world, I don't think you would ever see such performances like this. And they connect with other ethnic groups. For example, they integrate the Assyrian community into those performances. They integrate the Armenian, the Christian, and Yazidi, and Alawites, and the Druze community. So, as Peter and Hawzhin was mentioning, it's not just one people taking this resistance. It's a collective work of many ethnic groups. And I want to link it back to that flower example. It's about we're all different flowers, but when we come together, we create this beauty. And also want to, before I share the video, I want to probably always mention this, but scarves and what it means and the flora and that. So it has different meaning, but the main meaning started in was Kurdish mothers. The Kurdish mothers back in Turkey, the government had this assimilation strategy where they took young men and the husbands and the young children away from Kurdish mothers, and then they were killed and their bones would never be found. The Kurdish mothers came together on a Saturday, and every Saturday, I believe now it's probably in the 3,000th week now in Istanbul and Ankara and other parts of Kurdistan as well in Turkey, they come together demanding justice for their children. Now can you imagine a Kurdish mother coming every Saturday, she knows her child has passed away, but even that one bone or having something, being told that yes, your child has been passed away, might create some relief for that mother. Because in our culture, when someone passes away, the mother would always visit their children and their relatives, and they will tie a white scarf on it, symbolizing peace and love. So that's one example. Another example, which one of my favorite ones, and I kind of sometimes get emotional for this as well, is when ISIS was attacking in Rojava against our people. They had a belief. The ISIS had this belief, which is a good belief actually. If you were killed by a female fighter, you will go to hell.
Where they belong.
Yeah, where they belong. Even hell is too nice for them, but that's where they belong. So when they will see a Kurdish woman with a scarf, they'll get scared. And purposely, the Kurdish woman, when they see an ISIS fighter, sometimes even like a couple of meters like this, there'll be a fighter fighting you. They will wave the scarves in the air. And sometimes in some instances, they will see the ISIS members kind of withdraw and run away. And then the Kurdish men started wearing this because ISIS always undermined the woman's role, saying they will always see a woman as like just saying as a sex object. They wouldn't see a woman as a human being. So the Kurdish men would say it was an honor for us to wear this. Calling us a woman or calling us a female, a girl, actually gives us honor. We are happy to be called a female. We are proud to be called a female or a woman because they're the ones who fought against ISIS. What better honor could you give us? Yeah. So that's one of the symbols, and also in the Iran province of Kurdistan as well, when women used to wear this as well, women would be hung and tortured. So there was a campaign that had gone in Iran and Kurdish regions where men would purposely wear women clothes and wear the women's scarves, and even to now, everyday Kurdish men and Kurdish women are being hung and killed. And I want to emphasize, I know we're talking about Rojava, but also want to talk about Rojava, which is the Iranian Kurdish province, where still till now people are resisting, despite the media perhaps talking about other conflicts around the world. But we always need to remember that there are conflicts happening all around the world, and the situation in Iran, which is led by the Kurdish people, led by the Xinjiang Azadi movement, which came, as Hawzhin mentioned, through the philosophy of Mr. Abdullah Öcalan. Because Mr. Abdullah Öcalan said, you cannot have a free society if women are not free. And I want to end with this note and share this wonderful video with you all. Thank you.
Thank you.